What do we want to talk about first? Do you want to talk about your rubric?
Yes,
Or
I would love to. Could you throw that up on the screen for everybody?
Pete, of course I can.
Thank you, Jeremy. So this is a quick rubric that I put together. You're looking at the whole thing right here. And this is a rough sketch, as simplified of a version as I could think to make, of how to rate a homebrew and how to decide if a homebrew is of a quality that is, worthy of, say, a published, a published work, or an Ars Arcana, or, any kind of, presentable, source.
Yeah.
So this is the official Fantasy Labs rating system. It rates homebrew on a Maddie Moore's rubric. How many credits am I getting this semester? Well, you're going to be rated out of a scale of 5 credits, which is a 5-point system where basically each category, I have 5 different categories in which you would evaluate a homebrew, and each one would earn you up to a point. And it's just pass or fail on each of these. Does it have this? If it does, then
no half points.
But while there are no half points, there are double points. So if a homebrew has, in a particular category, it excels beyond what would be kind of normal in that category. For example, if a homebrew is so flavorful and it having that flavor necessitates for some reason that it is maybe a little bit over or underpowered, then it might get 2 points in that category. In allowing for, I guess, a technical possible theoretical score of a 10 out of 5 using this system. But I think the most likely score of, like, the passing score is your 5 out of 5. So I guess you could also say that anything that isn't a 5 out of 5 is not considered a passing homebrew using this system.
Yeah, and hello everybody in the chat. I know it's Weaving Chaos, welcome. Van Sunny, welcome as well. And Taysummer Ford 1992, thank you for the follow, my friend. Welcome to the show, guys. Yeah, we're just getting into things here, explaining our kind of rating rubric, and we're going to jump right into an actual an idea that someone in our community put out on our Discord, which you can find a link to just below the Twitches. But yeah, Pete, so talk about the categories, right? You mentioned there are 5 of them, and you can get either 1 point or you can get 2 points. But what do you get these points for doing, right? What does the homebrew have to have?
So it has to satisfy these 5 kind of, I guess, what I would call the pillars of homebrew. And the first is space, the design space, to be more specific. And that is, does it say yes? Is the answer to these questions yes? Is there room for what you've designed in 5th edition? Does it fill a niche, either mechanically or in flavor, that isn't currently in the system? And could what you made already be accomplished with something that exists? So this is, I think, and I put them kind of in the order in which I feel like they need to be true, if that makes sense. So space, like, before you make a homebrew, this is something that you should think about before you even begin designing, in my opinion. And that is, can I do what I want to make here with things that already exist in 5th edition? Is it worth the time to create an entirely separate piece of rule set and mechanics for what I want to do?
And we're not talking about stuff like, yeah, technically, all right, if I reflavor all of my spells to be little magic items, I have an artificer now. That's without radically reflavoring a class. Is there space for it? Because
absolutely,
you can beat around any bush and pretend anything, but yeah.
And, things, reflavors like, I want to create a new, I want to create a new martial class that's really good specifically at just the spear. In which case, you should probably just have it be a subclass for a fighter, which is good at using a spear, if that's what you want, rather than making an entire spearman class. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about.
Yeah, Roger Try. I made a class that's like a man who fights.
It's a fighter, but just only a male fighter would be that entire class. So that's the first category. You get a point for space if you're not duplicating something that already exists. A homebrew is going to get a next point is on balance. This is probably one of the more subjective ones, but it's just, is what has been created balanced technically? Do the numbers line up with other comparable content that already exists in the game? I don't know if there's any other simpler way. I think most people probably have a pretty good idea for, and if you've been playing for long enough, a good sense as well for whether or not something is balanced. If you create a third level spell that's doing more AoE damage than Fireball,
it's not balanced.
Odds are it's not balanced. Really, if you create a third level spell that's doing as much AoE as Fireball, it's probably not balanced, but that's aside the point. Do you have anything else you'd like to add on that category? I think that one's probably the most straightforward of them.
Yeah, balance is it's at one point it's also the most straightforward, but it's also the least straightforward, right? Because you got to compare it to not just its own kind of niche, right? So for example, if you gave a bard a really good second level spell, right, that might be overpowered on a wizard, but for a bard that maybe is lacking in powerful damaging second level spells, that might be okay. It might be a little overpowered on certain classes, but not really a problem on others. So that's something that we're going to consider as we go through these kind of balanced perspectives. It's just of the perspective of what class is really going to be using it.
Yeah, it has to definitely be
if it's a spell or an ability or something.
Like in the context of other things that are of a similar of a similar thing.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely with you on that.
Other things of a similar thing. Whew, we're on fire tonight.
I'm really some people have called me a wordsmith, and those people were correct.
A word homebrewer, some might say.
I homebrew phrases with a mastery rivaled only perhaps by Christopher Perkins. I don't know. The next category here is playability, and this is another pretty strict binary, and it sounds more obvious than I think it is, and that is, would adding whatever this new homebrew is to your game disrupt the flow of play? Or are there features in it that are going to frustrate other players or perhaps the GM? And while on the surface you can just look at it and be like, well, there's nothing that's too overpowered, so it's not going to be problematic. Perhaps there's a feature for, more of a role-playing feature that makes it so that combats, like an enemy won't initiate combat with someone who has successfully used, this skill check based feature on somebody. That might sound good on paper, but that's the kind of thing that if you presented that in a game, it might remove that combat pillar of play, because your bard with his crazy persuasion score keeps just talking everyone out of ever fighting.
You old Unearthed Arcana. Actually, not even that old, like a couple months ago. But Roger Twy's got another great example in the chat, right? A paladin with the vow of silence, or the oath of silence, maybe not the best for a collaborative social game like D&D.
That's an excellent example.
Now, maybe if you're playing a one-person campaign, that might work. Maybe just the one player in the DM, because then it's like, yes, my character does this. But
another thing that's going to fit into this category is, are you giving them a feature that's going to step on the toes of other classes, like class identity? And I think this is a little bit what you were getting at with balance before too, because these definitely play off each other to a certain extent. But are you giving a barbarian a feature that essentially does the same thing as bardic inspiration and making the bard feel a lot less useful for having their cool bardic inspiration, while the barbarian's now doing that and absolutely crushing people with a reckless attack? So you have to be considerate to other players about that and playability as well.
Yeah, a great example of bad playability was the old Lore Master Wizard from the Old Arcana. Very cool, but really stepped on the toes of the sorcerer with their meta magic options in a way that really was probably not healthy, which is why it didn't go forward.
Indeed.
Also, we have Malkara Darkwell in the chat. Great name, by the way. CR is not always balanced either where monsters are concerned. Yeah, exactly, right? CR for monsters is totally balanced on this, this abstract, objective, like, mechanical numbers-based system. And what might be really scary for one party is an absolute joke to another, right? You got 3 Azamars all with necrotic resistance. Those vampires are not nearly as scary as you thought they were going to be.
And kind of in the same vein, Malkar, I think that could be applied to like magic items too. For example, you might rate a magic item at a different rating than it is. So even though, say, the Cloak of Displacement is a great example of an item that's a lot more powerful than its rarity would indicate, because Cloak of Displacement is considered a rare item, correct?
Yeah, it's rare.
So this is a magic item that's considered rare, but gives essentially everyone disadvantage on attacks against you.
Very strong.
It should be a very rare item, so a dungeon master might unwittingly put that into their game thinking that it was at a power level appropriate for what they think they should be getting, a rare item, and then that's the kind of thing that would really affect
it should be legendary. Yeah, right. Weird, all the displacer beasts are extinct in this world. Can't get that anymore. And I actually really like what you just mentioned there, Pete, because that brings up a really valuable point here is, yes, and I'm going to answer your question here. Chill Pandara, and Pandana. My God, I can't talk for the life of me. Because we're going through and rating different homebrew, right, and evaluating homebrew and trying to create better homebrew and be better at creating homebrew. It's also going to help you in evaluating like existing things, like he was just saying, right? Yeah. If you're a dungeon master and you're pretty new and you don't really understand, how to evaluate items or monsters or all sorts of stuff like that, you could end up really making a huge mistake in one of your games and making a huge problem for yourself or for your players. Throwing a monster that's way too powerful against them, just not really realizing it. And all of this process we're going to be doing here should hopefully, help over time to get all of us to become better at that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What you rate the rope of useful items? That might be a fun one.
Is
rating existing items. Right? Yeah, it's currently an uncommon item. I think because it gives you all these mundane things.
I guess it very much depends on how well you roll on your robe of useful items, because there are definitely a way to roll a robe of useful items where it is like, it is like a rare, or maybe even if you got enough of like the 3rd level spell scrolls and stuff, maybe even like a very rare. But I think as it stands, I'm pretty comfortable with it at uncommon. Maybe it could get touched up to rare.
I think the Iron Door is so good. If you get the Iron Door
is really powerful.
You're in good shape. Anyway, Pete, let's talk about the last 2 parts, design and flavor.
Indeed. So design is referring to the elegance of the actual mechanics that you're using. One, do they follow the conventions of 5e, the 5e system? So have you done everything in a way that works with what already exists and the infrastructure that is in place? This isn't telling you should do that. It's just saying you should usually do that. And then the question is, in a situation where you're breaking the conventions of 5e, which I think all great design in some way finds some new way to work with the rules of 5th edition. Don't quote me on that. In the places where it's doing that, are the mechanics clear? Are they simple? Are they written in the most efficient way possible? And this, I think, is the hallmark of good design. If it's something new, how creative are you making your mechanics? And this isn't a referral to the flavor of them, which is going to be the last pillar that we talk about here. This is just the actual codified mechanics. How elegant are they is the term that is most commonly used.
Yeah, can you keep it simple? Can you keep it easy to remember, right? Because the biggest problem with any kind of mechanic in any sort of tabletop game is it something that the player, that a very average player who's not super into it can remember? And that's something to always keep in mind when we talk about design.
Yeah, for certain. And, simple is pretty much always the best kind of course of action.
Some might disagree.
Anytime, yeah. At any time when you're looking at design, my first thought is always, is it as simple as this could be with what they are trying to do? Because it doesn't, even if something's not simple, for example, the wild shape feature of the druid, that is not a simple feature by any means, but I would say that it is elegant because it is the simplest form in which they could encompass all of the various rules and nuances that they wanted to put into that feature.
Well, it's also pretty easy to remember. It's a lot of rules, but it boils down to a couple of very easy concepts that as a player, you can remember very easily.
And Jeremy, we'll talk about the last one here, flavor.
Yeah, I mean, flavor, that's the big one. That's what we all love here, right? That is the essence of what it is, right? What fantasy are you trying to fulfill with this homebrew you're creating, right? What new opportunity and options for your players or yourself or the people you're building it for, right? What does it bring to the game? You know, like Pete was saying, if you want to build specifically a spearman subclass for the fighter, what new options is that going to bring, right? You can bring in some cool options like phalanx could be a really cool idea to bring in, from maybe inspired by, right, the Greek hoplites back in the classical era. And you can take some cool mechanics and inspiration from those and build something that, when Pete said spearman subclass for fighter, that was kind of a throwaway of like, here's something that's really not that interesting. But when you turn it into the hoplite, right, a famous historical like unit, right, within the ancient Greek paramilitary system, this can be very inspiring, can be very flavorful, and that's really what flavor is. It's things that inspire your players. Even mechanics can be very flavorful if they work in such a way that it makes sense and inspires you to use the abilities in the way that they're meant to be used.
Especially kind of knowing this community and seeing all the creativity you guys so consistently bring. This is one of those categories that I feel like people are going to, this is one that you probably pass before you've even started working on your homebrew.
This is the first thing you really think of, to be honest.
This is the flavor that inspires. This is what inspires you to want to make something in the first place. Is I think that this is going to be cool. Let's see if it'll work out and we can actually make it into something, tangible.
Yeah, and I completely agree with Malkara saying there. Flavor can also be like genre, and it really can, right? I mean, you can use it for... it's not that it can be like genre. It's inspired by the genre, right?
Yeah,
the flavor of like a magical fighter is going to be a lot different in a hex punk, cyberpunk world than on 5th edition D&D classic, medieval Europe, right? Where it's the guy with the sword who does magic.
In a lot of ways, I would say genre kind of dictates what your flavor is going to be, the space in which your flavor can fit. Because that magical in a Western setting, for example, the flavor of like, I'm a fighter that also uses magic, probably wouldn't necessarily fit unless it's a weird Western magic, steampunk Western magic setting. That sounds like a blast, but I digress.
Also, yeah, and Chill Panda, Chill Pandana, I'm gonna get that sooner or later. Congrats on setting up your session 0, deciding to set up a game. Same with oh my goodness, I just saw it in the chat, but I lost it. Tay Summer Ford. I'm really excited you guys are starting up games. I really hope that we can be of service to you here on this show.
Chill Pandano is asking, may I ask just story-wise of a campaign, how would you run an evil campaign?
That's always a really tough one.
Yeah, evil campaigns can be tough to manage because in my own experience, the thing about evil characters is a lot of times they have to be more proactive as opposed to good characters react to the things that evil characters do. So you just have to make and this is obviously the catch in any campaign, an interesting world that will inspire your players to want to do evil is a very high ideal, but probably the best answer I can give in a short blurb.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say another take on that, because there's a totally different perspective, is, in a lot of Dungeons & Dragons campaigns, right, there's an overarching bad guy, right, that's going to do a bad thing. You can still have that in an evil campaign. You can just have a different evil guy that's going to do evil stuff that's bad for your evil characters. So, your players, if you're playing an evil campaign, have to want to play an evil campaign. And even if they have to stop an even greater evil, they might do evil things to do that. Evil to beat evil, right? You don't have to necessarily rework the whole deal for them. You can give them just the same old, yeah, hey man, there is an evil lich who is draining the souls out of everyone in the world really slowly. And that really is bad for your players.
That's bad for everybody.
Yeah, bad for everybody. So you need to stop him. But that doesn't mean you're going to be good along the way.
Malkara was saying, or a hero is the villain. That's also cool. Yeah. Like, there's so many cool. I could picture like a really brutally lawful, like good
the over-righteous paladin.
Yeah, that's trying to like wipe out all of the shreds of villainy, and maybe your characters have turned over or had some troubles earlier in their day, but have been kind of low key since. There's a lot of cool things you could do, but those are a few ideas. That's it for our.
Also, hello, Max. Here. It's good to see you. I didn't know if you said hi.
Hi, Max. We're talking about the new rating system for our homebrews that we're going to be doing here on Fantasy Labs. I think it's time to hop into one of those, Jeremy.
Yeah.